Hi, this is Dr. Phil Rosenkrantz, and I wanted to record a video to kind of update you on some things. Let me pull up a little slide to help guide us through this. This video update is based on my concerns from quiz number 3, that includes practice quiz number 3, and also milestone 2, where we were looking at the cash flow diagrams in class. So what I'm going to cover here are some of the quiz 3 results in general, then talk about some of the issues that came up from that. One is interest rate confusion. I think there's a lot of people that are confused about various interest rates. How to construct a cash flow diagram. When I went around the class, it was clear that I needed to talk about that to the whole class. Discuss very briefly what the number of periods to use is on your projects. Talk about the minimum attractive rate of return, economic criteria, and then based on some of that, I've added a slide that I want on your Project 2 presentation. So I want to go over that. So I'm going to be going back and forth to different screens. So related to quiz number 3, I thought there was, for many students, a lack of understanding of basics. These are concepts that if you don't understand them, you'll just keep getting the same results on future quizzes. Then also, I wanted to mention that some students didn't start the quiz at the designated time. And what you need to know is that when you're taking the quiz, like you're going to next time, quiz number 4, you need to log in at 5:30. If you don't, you're taking a chance that when you get to 60 minutes, you will be cut off. That's the time allowed on a quiz. But if you start at 5:30, there's a little bit of a grace period. It lets you finish the problem that you're on. And if you don't start on time, you're taking a risk of being cut off right exactly at 60 minutes, as a few students found out who started very late. Also, I want to point out that quiz number 3, practice quiz number 3, only one person got the full points for that. And what bothers me is that if there's a problem on quiz number 3 and you get 4 tries and you're just guessing for the first couple of tries, you don't know how to do it, feel free to send me an email, ask for a maybe even a Zoom meeting, or something, so that you don't run out of all of your attempts. And then even if you do run out of the attempts, if you don't get it, then email me and say, hey, what happened here? I'm going to go over one of the questions from the practice quiz in a little while. And also, regarding office hours, we're halfway through the semester and only one student has dropped in for office hours, and that was to discuss the project, not to discuss any homework. So I have never had this bleak of a response. I've only had a few students send emails about homework problems, or even request to go over their quiz on a Zoom meeting. So I don't know what's going on, but it's not that I am worried about whether or not you understand something as much as I'm worried about that you're just not communicating. And when you get out there on your job and you have a question about something, you just can't ghost it. you need to practice getting answers to questions while you're here in school, where the cost of doing it is real cheap. This is where you learn how to communicate and make these connections and get answers to your questions. So that's what concerns me. I've never seen it this bleak before, as far as how many students are just not even asking questions. So I rambled on that one. I apologize. But anyway, I'm going to move on. Now I want to talk about interest rate confusion. Well, this course talks about a lot of different kinds of interest rates. There are a lot more interest rates out there than what we discuss in class. But there's a number of them that we do, and you need to make sure you understand the terminology. So I'm going to run through some of this, and then maybe this will help some of you. So the first one on this list, and by the way, this list is not in any priority order. It's a random list, but let me go through it. The first type of interest rate is called simple interest rate. Let me tell you that this isn't used anymore because it doesn't take into account the time value of money. So if you ever hear the term simple interest rate, this isn't something that people are using anymore. In fact, it's illegal to use in some circumstances because it's deceptive. But let me move on. Periodic interest rate is one we use all the time. It is the interest rate per period. If the period is a year, then it's an annual interest rate. If the period is monthly, then it's the interest rate per month. So it's the annual interest rate divided by 12. If it's by quarter, it's the annual interest rate divided by 4. If it's semi-annual, et cetera, et cetera. This is one we use all the time. The compound interest rate is what we call in this class the effective interest rate. And so it's I subscript effective sometimes in your book. This takes into account the compounding for the number of compounding periods in a year. So this one we use all the time. And this is I effective. The next one is the nominal interest rate. This is the annual interest rate. And so if you know the periodic interest rate, it's that periodic interest rate times the number of periods in a year. So this is, in our textbook, uses lowercase r often for the nominal interest rate. So lowercase I and lowercase r are what you're using the most in this class. The real interest rate is the nominal interest rate adjusted for inflation. And usually you take the nominal interest rate and subtract the inflation rate from that to get the real inflation rate. We're not using that too much. We do have a chapter in the book on inflation, but I skipped that chapter. The next one is prime rate. This one you see out in the business world, and this is what banks use. It's the interest rate they're using at the moment for their best customers. And then if you're not the best customer, then your interest rate is the prime rate plus some additional interest because you're at higher risk. So it might be the prime interest rate plus 1% or plus 2% or plus 5%. But we don't use that too much in our class. The fixed interest rate refers to usually home loans or other loans where the interest rate they're using to calculate your payments is fixed for the entire life of the loan, doesn't change. And that's what most loans are. And I would recommend that you always get a fixed interest rate loan just to protect yourself. Because the next type of interest rate is a variable interest rate. And this is when you have a loan. It could be a home loan. It could be a home equity line of credit. But some people go ahead and get a variable interest rate because it is usually lower than the prime interest rate because they're trying to use it to suck people into getting a loan, and they guarantee that for a certain period of time, you have a low interest rate, but after that period of time, it could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, then it switches to a market interest rate, which is usually a lot higher. So here's what happens. People that think they're only going to keep a piece of property for a short period of time might get a variable interest rate because it's low. But the market changes, they can't sell the property, then it switches to the high interest rate, and now they can't afford the payments, and they go into foreclosure and lose the property. Now, you may think that's not very likely, but 20 years ago, people lost property like crazy because they had a variable interest rate loan and they got caught with their pants down. Okay, annual percentage rate, APR. This is the same as the effective interest rate sometimes. What it refers to is sometimes when you're borrowing money, your payments aren't based just on how much you're borrowing, but it's based on how much you're borrowing plus any fees they have attached to it, like loan initiation fees, etc. And what that has a tendency to do is raise the interest rate on the loan, and that is the annual percentage rate, APR. You'll see that a lot when you're buying a car, for example. The effective interest rate, I've already mentioned that. This takes into effect compounding. And so we use the effect function or the effective interest rate formula along with the periodic interest rate and the number of periods to get that. So this is a big one in our class. And the next one is called the MARR, minimum attractive rate of return. It's also called out in the business world the discount rate. You'll hear both of those. They mean the same thing. This is used to calculate present value of cash flows. And it's what the company considers to be the value of money they need to get whenever they make a business decision. If they can't get the minimum attractive rate of return, then they will take their money and do something else with it, unless it's something they can't avoid. So this is not a loan interest rate. It's not the inflation rate. It is a number calculated based on a number of things, and that's all discussed in Chapter 15. There's a video on Chapter 15. It's only about 7 minutes long. You can look at Chapter 15. Chapter 15 includes a section on some sample MARR values. I discussed that in the video I made. Then, but this is important, and it was obvious when I went around the room that a lot of people have no clue yet about what the MARR is, and I'm not blaming you for that because I don't think I've explained it, but apparently not well enough. You need that for your project. Anyway, both projects actually. Then the last one is the inflation rate. Now, that's not really an interest rate, but it's used in conjunction with interest rates sometimes. But that is the amount of buying power that the dollar loses every year because of this thing we call inflation. Well, how does that generally happen? It happens because of increases in the money supply and a few other things. In other words, if more money is injected into the money supply, it dilutes the value and the buying power of all the rest of the dollars. So when the government cranks up the printing press and injects more money into the money supply, inflation happens. Then prices go up. Inflation isn't because prices go up. Prices go up because of inflation. There are other reasons that cause the money supply to go up, such as increase in the use of credit. And there are a few other reasons too. But the worst thing that can happen is when you have inflation that is excessive. And what do I mean by excessive? My opinion, anything over 3% inflation is probably excessive. In 1980, for those of you that were here, which none of you were, I was here, inflation was 13% in 1980. And so the value, the buying power of money just really dropped. And that cost President Carter his chance at getting reelected because that happened under his watch. So anyway, so those are just some of the common inflation rates. And you need to understand which value or which type of inflation rate is being talked about in a conversation or in a problem or in a question. And you get that from the context of it. And you only get that if you paid attention and studied this a little bit. This is a critical part of this course. And when you get out there and you're working in business, you need to understand what type of inflation rate is being discussed. Okay, so let me move on. But this was real important to talk about. Okay, now I want to talk about cash flow diagrams. There were a lot of cash flow diagrams that I looked at the other day that were not standard. They weren't correct. So let me give a few examples here. I'm going to start with an example that I used in class, which was where we were comparing the Toyota and the Honda alternatives, those two different scenarios. And I'm going to use Toyota here to make a cash flow diagram. Now, a cash flow diagram shows cash flows. It's not just a diagram that shows a whole spreadsheet unless everything on the spreadsheet is a cash flow that is part of your problem. So let me show you the first example where we're looking at this situation where we're trying to find out what the net present worth is for the Toyota and for the Honda. But I'm just going to use Toyota to make my cash flow diagram. So what are the cash flows we had here? We had the initial down payment of $8,000. See my cursor at the top. Then we calculated what the monthly payment would be over 36 months. And we did that using the number of periods, 36. We used the amount that we were financing, which was $24,000. Where is it? We had a down payment of $8,000. So 8,000 subtracted from 40,000, we were getting a loan for $32,000. And if the car loan rate interest was 2%, then the payment would come out to be $916.56. I'm going to get to that again. So that's the payment. It's a uniform series. We had the uniform monthly cost of gas, $299. We had the monthly cost of maintenance, $1,667. Then we had the uniform monthly benefit, $2,000 a month. And then in time period 36, when we sold the car as a used car, we got $20,000. So if I wanted to make a cash flow diagram from this, that would be all these columns would be legitimate cash flows to include. So let's look at an easy way to do that with Excel. So I'm going to block these columns, including the headings, all the way down to the last time period. Then I'm going to, I have to bring back my headers. So I'm going to go to Insert up here at the top menu, hit Insert, and I'm going to insert a graph. And if I go over to Recommended Graphs and click on it, it gives me a chance to click for all charts. This is all the possible charts you could choose that they're recommending. And it gives me a column chart. And if I scroll over to the right about 3, I get a 100% stacked column. And if you look at this, you see that it creates a cash flow diagram, which shows plus and minus values. It shows what's happening at the year 0, the down payment, and year, time period 37 or 36, the resale value. And I've already copied it below here. Let me scroll down. And it doesn't have any values on it. Now, on graphs that aren't this busy, you can click, and there's a little plus icon at the upper right. If you click on it, it raises a menu, and you can put in data labels, and it'll put in values. But this is kind of busy. So what you can do is what I did here is, for example, for the payments, I created a text box. Let me pause here. Okay. The next on the list is the number of periods to use. And this needs to be either monthly, preferably, if there are monthly payments. Now, if you've got a 30-year loan, that's 360 periods. So your spreadsheet would have 360 rows on it. And that is just fine. Some of the teams were they were using years because it seemed like it would be easier, but it's not necessarily easier. And one or two teams actually broke it into 5 years lumps. And then the time value of money is totally gone for all the equations. You are not using the time value of money. And that's not what business would do. If you want to do this like a professional, then you use as the number of periods that is in the problem, because that's what Excel does. So please take that into consideration. You're actually not doing yourself any favors when you compact the years and try to do it mathematically correct. Next, I wanted to talk again about the minimum attractive rate of return. I've already mentioned it enough, I think. You need to understand it. Like I said, chapter 15, there's a 7-minute video. And this is not the same as I. It's not the same as R. It is a separate number. It is not the inflation rate. Okay, next is economic criteria. This was a big problem when I walked around the classroom the other day. And also, a lot of people blew these questions, didn't get them right on the quiz. In fact, this was probably the biggest loss of points on the quiz, these economic criteria. So let me go over that. Now let's look at economic criteria. This is something that a lot of you didn't understand. On the left, you see the different methods of analysis we've been learning. For example, the first one there, present worth, that's chapter 5. Annual cash flow, chapter 6. Future worth, benefit cost ratio, chapter 9. Down here we have rate of return, that's chapter 7 and chapter 8. So these represent the different techniques that you're learning. And any one of those will work and give you the same answer if you do it properly. So let me repeat, you only need one of these, and you'll pick the one that fits best with your problem. The majority of you will use present worth. Some of you will use future worth, and a few might use annual worth. But you pick one. Now, each one of these cases has 3 different economic criteria available depending on the type of problem. Fixed input problems, fixed output problems, or neither input nor output fixed. And a lot of you blew those questions on the last quiz. So for whichever method you pick, you have to look and see how the criteria is defined. For example, present worth, if neither input nor output are fixed, you want to maximize the present worth of benefits minus the present worth of cost, which is also called the net present worth. If it's fixed output, like you want to buy 50 tons of air conditioning, that's a fixed output. You don't want 51 tons of air conditioning, you want 50 or less. No, you don't even want less, you want 50. Okay, so you want to get that for the cheapest you can. That's minimize the present worth of cost. Now, when we're talking about fixed output situations, which most of the time we are, then we usually treat cost as a positive number, not a negative. It's a negative on the cash flow diagram, but in working problems, a lot of time we treat the costs as positives. Let me give you an example. When you go into a dealership and you want to buy a car, you are trying to buy the car you want at the lowest possible cost, aren't you? You don't go in and say, what's the most you'll let me pay? You want to find out what the cheapest you can get is. So if you ask the salesperson, how much does this car cost? They're not going to say negative $50,000. Or if you go in and say, how much will it cost to get my brakes redone? They're not going to say negative $1,000. They're going to say everything with a positive sign in front of it because you're just talking about the cost. So sometimes when we're working problems for fixed output, we're minimizing the present worth of cost, but we're using it as a positive number, and we just want the smallest positive present worth. That's because that's the least costly. All right. Sorry that's confusing, but you need to get used to the terminology. So here's what I've done. I have added 2, and let me get there. So here we are at Project 2 instructions. Scroll down to near the end where it says Final Presentation. And what I've added here is a new slide I want in the presentation. It's a single slide, and it has 3 things on it. What technique you're using. Is it present worth, chapter 5, annual worth, rate of return, future worth, what are you using? What criteria of those 3 are you using? Are you maximizing net present worth, minimizing the present worth of cost, which of those three criteria? And finally, what is the minimum attractive rate of return you're using in your analysis to find net present worth or annual worth? So one slide where you're identifying these three things. That's added to the presentation. So with that, let me finish up something that I forgot to include. It had to do with the practice quiz. Let me get back to the practice quiz. On the practice quiz, I mentioned there was a question, and it had to do with a car loan, and it said $30,000 cost, down payment of 20%, 6% loan over 5 years or 60 periods. The resale value would be 25% of the cost. The minimum attractive rate of return is 8%, and inflation rate is 3%. And what I asked you to do was calculate the present worth of cost. One student in the class got it right. Nobody else did. Nobody emailed me to find out why or any of that. Now, let me explain how to do this problem, although I'm not going to give you the answer. We have to figure out what the cash flows are first. The cash flows are the initial down payment, which is at time zero, $6,000. We have $24,000 left to finance at 6%, so we have to figure out the loan. So using the payment function, a 6% loan is 0.005 rate, or 0.5% per month. So that's the periodic interest rate. N is 60 months. 24,000 is the amount we're financing. You get a payment of $463.99 a month. So that's shown as a uniform series on the cash flow diagram. It's a down arrow because it's money you're putting out. And then at the end, you're selling it for 25% of its original value, which is $7,500. So you have an up arrow of 7,500. So now, what is the present worth of cost of this vehicle? So we want to add up all the costs. Well, we have $6,000 is the initial cost, so I have a 6,000. Then I want to find out what is the present value of this uniform series and the present value of this future value, this F series, F value. Well, I can do that with one Excel function. The present value and the interest rate is, to use here, is 0.08 divided by 12. You have to divide by 12 to get the periodic interest rate. 60 months, 60 periods. Then you have a down arrow of $463 $9.99 for the payment, and the future value is 7,500, and we're putting a plus sign there. And in order to make this work, because it reverses signs, I put a plus sign here, and if I just plug this in, I get the answer. Now, you're saying, wait a minute, what about the inflation? What about the inflation? There's nothing about net present worth calculation here that requires inflation. So that is really extraneous information you don't need. It's not part of this. Now, inflation is actually in already because the MARR of 8%, when it's figured out by the financial people, it intrinsically has inflation considered in the MARR. So that's where it's considered. So this was really just a red herring. But anyway, study this if you need to make sure you understand how to calculate car payments, for one. And you'll notice how we had to use the car payment to get a net present worth, or a present worth of cost. Whenever that's when you're using the MARR, is when we're getting a present worth, a future worth, something like that. Okay, that's all for now. I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to end this and see what happens.